When people talk about family business, they don't tell you how much of your life it's supposed to consume. My dad's company was more than just his legacy, it was practically the third sibling in our house. I joined straight out of college, skipping grad school and giving up the job offers that made my friends jealous, all because I wanted to prove something. Maybe to him, maybe to myself. Or maybe I just craved that rare, approving look from my father, the one that came only when I fixed what others couldn't. 70-hour work weeks became my normal. I was always the first one in and the last to leave, half of my wardrobe permanently living under my desk. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd buy back the missed time once I'd earned it. I skipped holidays, family vacations, and my best friend's wedding. When my younger sister had her baby shower, I spent most of it outside on work calls, making excuses about a deal that couldn't wait. My girlfriend stuck around for a while, but after my third forgotten anniversary, she finally left. I tried to tell myself I'd made the right call. Sacrifice now, reward later. Dad always said, if you want something permanent, you have to work like it's temporary. I carved that mantra into my bones. But there was a quiet resentment building, something like rust, eating away at the pride I once felt. Every time I pulled an all-nighter to fix a client crisis, I got a stiff nod from my dad in front of the staff, but not a single word of thanks and pride. When I landed a huge client, my father took all the credit at the next board meeting. That's how it works, he'd say if I ever dared to bring it up. Someday, it'll all be yours. You'll understand. Still, I kept pushing. Maybe if I just outworked everyone, he'd finally look at me like I was more than an employee. Maybe he'd see me as a son worth respecting. I ignored the ache in my chest, the exhaustion that made my hands shake, the warning text from my mom about my blood pressure. I lost friends, missed birthdays, and forgot what weekends felt like. But every morning, I showed up earlier, stayed later, and tried harder. It never even crossed my mind that all this loyalty might be one-sided. Deep down, I believed it was all leading somewhere. I thought one day he'd hand me the keys to the kingdom, and all the empty spaces in my life would finally be filled. It was a Tuesday, nothing special, just another day lost to the endless cycle. I remember barely sleeping the night before, staying up to finish a last-minute proposal my dad said couldn't wait until morning. The next day, my alarm went off at 5, but I hit snooze. I'd never done that before. Just once, I wanted 10 extra minutes of quiet, my body heavy with exhaustion. I arrived 5 minutes late. Not an hour, not half a day, just 5 minutes. As I hurried through the glass doors, my dad was waiting by reception, arms folded. He didn't say good morning. He didn't even ask why I was late. His face was unreadable, but there was a coldness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He motioned me into his office. The whole walk down the hall felt surreal, as if I'd stepped outside my body. I tried to explain, to apologize, but he cut me off with a single gesture. "Pack your things," he said, not looking up from his desk. "You're done here." For a moment, I just stood there, certain I'd misheard. After everything I'd given up, birthdays, relationships, my health, this was how it ended? I waited for him to laugh, to reveal it was some twisted lesson about punctuality. But there was nothing. Just the scrape of his pen on paper, the computer screen reflected in his glasses. I looked around his office, at the photos of us on fishing trips, my childhood drawings tucked into the corner of his whiteboard. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for him, convinced myself he was just toughening me up for the real world. In that moment, it felt like those years had collapsed into a single, hollow ache in my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but something inside me broke instead. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was a final act of loyalty, but I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I walked to my desk and quietly packed my things. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers, the hush that fell as word spread. Some of them looked away, some gave me sympathetic nods, but no one said a word. When I left the building for the last time, my phone vibrated with messages, most of them from my mom and sister, asking if everything was okay. I didn't know how to answer. For so long, I believed my hard work would mean something to him. I'd made myself small so his shadow could loom larger. And now, with nothing left, I was simply disposable. I drove home in silence, my hands shaking on the wheel. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. I spent the first week in a kind of numb daze, shuffling from my bed to the kitchen and back again. My apartment, once just a place to crash for a few hours between work and sleep, felt foreign and hollow. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting a text from my dad saying it was all some misunderstanding. But every day, the silence stretched longer, heavier. At first, I told myself to be grateful for the time off. But the truth was, I had no idea what to do with myself. I'd never built a life outside the office walls. All my routines, coffee at 6, emails at 7, meetings by 9, were gone. Even my calendar, once filled with deadlines and conference calls, was suddenly, cruelly blank. I didn't realize how much of my identity was tied to being the reliable one, the first to arrive and the last to leave. My friends reached out, but I ignored most of their messages. What could I say? That I'd lost my job at my own father's company? That I'd wasted years chasing approval that never came? I stared at the walls, replaying every sacrifice in my mind. The time I skipped my sister's graduation because of a client emergency. The Christmas dinner I missed because Dad said we had to finalize the budget. The weekend I canceled a getaway with my girlfriend to pull an all-nighter at the office, believing that was what it took to earn my place. All those birthdays, anniversaries, and Sunday barbecues, I'd traded them all for a seat at a table that was never really set for me. The realization stung more than the job loss itself. I'd given everything to impress one man, and in the end, it hadn't mattered at all. For a while, grief pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. It was easy to sink into bitterness, to relive every injustice and every dismissive look from my dad. I cycled through anger, shame, regret, each one leaving me more hollow than before. I wanted to blame him for all of it, but some small, stubborn part of me kept whispering that I'd chosen this path. I was the one who'd made myself small, who'd let every slight go unchallenged, who'd built my life around someone else's approval. And yet, as the days turned into weeks, a strange sort of clarity began to settle in. Maybe I'd lost everything I thought I wanted, but for the first time, I was free. I didn't have to wait for his permission to live my life. I didn't have to keep sacrificing pieces of myself for someone who saw me as replaceable. It was terrifying, but there was also a kind of relief in it, a space where something new might grow. So, I made a promise to myself, no more living for someone else. No more chasing the approval of a man who couldn't see my worth. If I was going to rebuild, it would be on my own terms. Starting over was humbling in ways I never expected. My savings were tight, and every application I sent felt like swallowing a hard lump of pride. I reached out to old contacts, tried to network, and even considered jobs I once looked down on. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I was determined to build something that was mine, no matter how small. One afternoon, I landed an interview with a startup in a completely different industry, a tech company focused on sustainability. It wasn't what I had imagined for myself when I was younger, but the idea of working somewhere where my work mattered in a new way felt promising. Still, as the day of the interview approached, a gnawing doubt crept in. Would they see me as just the guy who used to work at Dad's firm? Would they expect me to fail because I was never truly independent? The interview itself was nerve-wracking. For the first time in years, I wasn't speaking the language of spreadsheets and balance sheets, but of ideas and impact. I fumbled a few answers, my confidence shaken, but I tried to be honest about my story, the sacrifices, the setbacks, and why I was ready for a fresh start. I left feeling vulnerable but hopeful. Days later, I got the call. They wanted me on board. It was a modest offer compared to my previous salary, but it was a chance to prove myself on my own. For the first time, I felt the thrill of stepping into a life where I could be valued not as Dad's kid, but simply as me. There were moments of fear. What if I failed? What if I never escaped the shadow of my father's company? But alongside the fear was a growing sense of agency. I was learning to trust myself, to set boundaries, and to rebuild my self-worth from the ground up. The hardest part was the silence from my family. My mom sent a few cautious texts asking how the new job was going. My sister was supportive but distant, still tangled in the family drama I was trying to leave behind. And my father? No calls, no messages, not even a glance from the sidelines. That absence was a hollow ache, but it was also a reminder. I was no longer playing by his rules. I was writing my own story. Months turned into a year, and slowly, the new life I was building started to take shape. The job at the startup wasn't just a paycheck. It was a place where my ideas mattered, where my voice was heard without the baggage of family ties. I was growing into someone I barely recognized, confident, independent, and proud of my work. My projects began to get noticed. A client I worked closely with praised me publicly at a conference. Industry blogs featured some of the innovations I helped launch. I even got invited to speak at a panel about sustainable business practices. It was the kind of success I never imagined I'd have without the safety net of my father's company. Word started to travel, not through my father, but through mutual contacts in industry circles. I heard through the grapevine that my name was being mentioned, and with it, stories of my achievements. I could almost hear my father's staff whispering behind closed doors, surprised that I'd made something of myself outside the family business. But I didn't reach out to him. The years of coldness and the final betrayal had cut too deep. It wasn't about revenge. I just didn't want to reopen old wounds or pretend the past didn't hurt. I stayed distant, keeping my wins private and my life focused on moving forward. At night, though, I sometimes thought about what it would be like to share this success with him. To look in his eyes and say, "I did it without you." But those thoughts were fleeting, drowned out by the stronger resolve to protect myself. I realized that I didn't need his approval anymore. I was enough on my own. There was pride in that realization. A quiet, steady pride that didn't need to be shouted. I was no longer defined by my father's shadow. I had finally stepped into the light on my own terms. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed one evening with a message from my dad. Just a simple text. "Can we talk? I miss having you around." It hit me like a punch in the gut. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let him stew in the silence that had stretched between us for so long. But another part, the part that had longed for his approval, flared up, hungry and raw. I thought about what I wanted to say, rehearsed my response over and over. Was this a genuine apology? Or just a way to ease his own guilt? Did I want to reopen old wounds? I decided to reply, but kept my message cold and brief. "I'm doing well. I hope you are too." He replied quickly, suggesting a call. But when I heard his voice, hesitant, vulnerable, I realized how much we had both changed. He admitted he had been harsh, that he regretted how he treated me. He said he missed me, not just as an employee, but as a son. I listened, but my heart was guarded. I told him I appreciated his words but needed more time. The years of disappointment couldn't be erased overnight. Trust, I said, had to be rebuilt, and maybe it never would be. That call was the end of something and the start of something else. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because I was no longer desperate for his approval, and sorrow for all the moments lost that I could never get back. I realized then that sometimes the people we want to heal with the most are also the ones who hurt us the deepest. And sometimes, self-worth isn't found in their acceptance, but in finally stepping away. Standing in the quiet light of my apartment one evening, I caught myself smiling at a text from my sister, an invite to her birthday party. It felt strange, like stepping into a room I hadn't been allowed to enter for years. But this time, I accepted. The night of the party was a mix of familiar faces and new memories. I watched my sister laugh with her friends, her happiness a balm to the wounds of the past. When she thanked me for coming, I felt a warmth that wasn't just from the wine. It was from knowing I had survived the storm and come out whole. There were moments when the past crept in, ghosts of the birthdays I missed, the dinners I skipped, the phone calls I never made. But this time, those memories didn't weigh me down. They reminded me of how far I'd come, of the strength I'd found in claiming my own worth. I even found myself hosting a small get-together a few weeks later. It wasn't grand or perfect, but it was mine. Surrounded by friends who valued me for who I was, not who my father was, I felt free. For so long, I thought my value depended on his judgment, on living up to his impossible expectations. But now, I know that self-worth can't be borrowed or earned from someone else. It has to come from within. I'm still healing, still learning to live outside his shadow. But I'm finally living on my own terms, with no guilt, no chains. And that makes all the difference.